The conference room smelled of glass cleaner and coffee. Adrian Hale stood near the tall windows, his suit pristine, a navy blue tailored to precision. He scanned the quarterly projections on his tablet, but his mind drifted. Again, his assistant had noticed it, so had his CFO. Even the board had picked up on it last week when Adrian, the man known for bulletproof focus, had paused mid-sentence in the middle of a pitch to blink down at his phone screen. Sorry, he'd muttered, recovering in a blink, but the numbers hadn't mattered quite the same since then. It was 4:47 p.m. He knew because his watch buzzed gently, as it always did when the school dismissal window closed. On Mondays and Wednesdays, a driver brought Noel home to the penthouse. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she had speech therapy. On Fridays, she stayed with his sister. The schedule was efficient, flawless, unchanging. Yet lately, it felt wrong. He picked up his phone and texted Melissa, the nanny. "How did therapy go today?" 3 dots, then a pause, then. She didn't want to go in, sat in the lobby with her arms crossed, wouldn't say a word. I didn't want to force her. She said she missed you. Adrian swallowed, his jaw locked the way it always did when something vulnerable threatened to reach the surface. He typed back, "Thank you, I'll take her myself next time." Then he turned back to the conference room table. "Sorry," he said again, though no one had spoken. "Let's wrap here. I'll review the revisions tonight." Outside, the sky darkened with February dusk. He stepped into the elevator, loosened his tie, and tried not to think of how his 6-year-old had crossed her arms in silence. Again. It was Noel's quiet that haunted him most. Adrian had always been methodical. Loss hadn't changed that. If anything, it had sharpened the routines, made him efficient to the point of numbness. After his wife's sudden passing 3 years ago, he'd channeled everything into structure. Work, nanny, schedule, order. Noel had only been 3, too young to remember clearly, or so he thought, but grief had a strange way of planting itself in small, tender places, and lately he could see it, in the way she hesitated before speaking. In the way she watched other kids from the sidelines. In the way she drew pictures of a woman with no face. He arrived home to the quiet hum of classical piano playing from the smart speaker. Noel was curled in a blanket on the couch, knees tucked, a book open but unread on her lap. Her soft brown hair was in its usual half-pony, though a few strands clung to her cheeks. She looked up as he entered, eyes guarded. "Hi, monkey," he said softly, crouching beside her. "How was your day?" She shrugged. "Melissa said you didn't want to go into therapy." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't nod or shake her head, just sat there. Adrian exhaled. "Okay, then I'll come with you next time, deal?" After a long pause, she nodded, just once. And it was enough. The office smelled faintly of lavender, not the fake kind, but the kind that clung to real wood and soft throw pillows. Dr. Eliza Monroe's space wasn't sterile like Adrian had expected. There were no fluorescent lights or plastic toys. Instead, there was warmth, a round rug with earth tones, a low bookshelf filled with storybooks, not binders, a window looking out over a quiet stretch of Brooklyn with just enough green to fool the eye into peace. Adrian sat stiffly on the couch as Noel explored the corner where a small dollhouse stood. She didn't speak, but she didn't resist when Eliza knelt beside her and gently offered her a choice, dolls or drawing. "Drawing," Noel whispered. Adrian blinked. Her voice was so soft he almost missed it. It was the first time he'd heard her speak outside their apartment in over a week. Eliza didn't look surprised. "Good choice. You can sit here by the table, you can draw whatever you want. I'll be right over here if you want to show me anything." Adrian watched as Noel climbed onto the tiny chair and picked up a crayon. She didn't look up at him, didn't look scared, just focused. He sat frozen for a few minutes before Eliza returned to the other couch and gestured for him to sit. "You're welcome to stay for part of the session, but sometimes she might do better on her own," Eliza said gently. She had warm brown eyes and her voice was low and even. "It depends on how she feels." "She's usually quiet," Adrian said, adjusting his cufflinks. "She hasn't made any friends at school. She stopped talking in class. They thought maybe she was shy or traumatized or both." "How long has that been going on?" "She used to talk more. Right after my wife died, she still talked, asked a lot of questions. Where do people go? Why can't I see her again?" Then it stopped. Eliza nodded. Sometimes kids turn silence into a shield, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. Adrian's gaze flicked toward his daughter. Her shoulders were hunched. She was drawing something with long strokes. "Do you want to tell me what's been hardest for you lately?" Eliza asked, her voice not directed at Noel but at him. He looked at her, startled. "Me." She didn't flinch. Therapy isn't only for the child. Healing tends to echo. If she's hurting, you might be too. He gave a half smile. "I don't have time to be hurt." Grief doesn't check your calendar. That silenced him. For the first time in months, Adrian felt something move in his chest, a subtle shift, a tightness loosening. "I don't know how to help her," he admitted. Eliza nodded. "Then let's start there." Noel looked up for a moment from her drawing. Their eyes met. She gave him a small, tentative smile. It hit him harder than he expected. And something in him, something long buried, broke open. It became a rhythm. Tuesdays at 4. Noel would hold his hand in the elevator, her palms small and warm, her grip tighter than necessary. Adrian started leaving work an hour early those days, no longer apologizing for it. His assistant had raised an eyebrow the first week, but stopped asking questions after seeing the steadiness in Adrian's gaze. Some things didn't need to be explained. He'd wait in the therapy office now, never more than a few feet from his daughter. Sometimes Eliza invited him in for the first few minutes. Sometimes she didn't. And slowly, the silences that used to stretch like empty fields between them began to feel like spaces being prepared for something new to grow. One session, Eliza stepped out after 30 minutes and approached him, holding a paper in her hand. "She wanted you to have this." It was a drawing, scribbly lines but deliberate. A tall figure in a suit holding hands with a small girl. Behind them a red door, a house maybe, or something else. At the bottom, in shaky block letters, it said, "This is us. Safe." Adrian stared at it for a long time, the weight of the paper heavy in his hands. That night he didn't take a single work call. He started noticing things he hadn't before. How Noel tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. How she lined up her shoes perfectly beside her bed, but left her toys scattered like a trail through the apartment. How she still clutched the same stuffed bunny at night, the one her mother had bought from a tiny store in Prague before she was born. And Eliza kept noticing things, too. "You said you work late most nights," she mentioned one Tuesday, after Noel had chosen to stay in the play corner on her own. "Does Noel ever ask you why?" "She doesn't have to," Adrian said. "She understands. Or she's afraid to ask." He paused, his jaw tightening again. "She draws pictures of you often," Eliza continued. "But you're always in a suit. Sometimes she draws herself watching you from a window." Adrian looked away, a dull ache forming behind his eyes. "Children don't need perfect parents," she said softly. "They need present ones." "I'm doing my best," he said, quieter now. "I didn't want to mess it up more by doing it wrong." "She doesn't need you to get it right. She needs you to try. That's where the healing is, in the trying." He didn't respond, but he stayed 10 minutes longer than usual that day, watching Noel quietly build a tower out of blocks. It fell over once. She rebuilt it. And something about that made him feel like he could, too. 2 weeks later, a parent-child art night was announced at Noel's school. He almost skipped it. The invite had been crumpled in her backpack, wedged between snack wrappers and half-completed worksheets. She hadn't mentioned it, but when he asked, she nodded once too quickly, then looked away. "Do you want to go?" he asked. She shrugged, but he recognized the flicker of hope in her face. "Okay," he said, "we'll go." The classroom buzzed with noise when they arrived. Other parents hunched over craft tables, laughing, helping their kids glue construction paper together. Adrian felt out of place in his blazer and Oxfords. Noel stayed close to his side, clutching his sleeve. A teacher greeted them and guided them to a table. Supplies were scattered across it: glitter glue, scissors, folded cardboard. Adrian hesitated, then rolled up his sleeves. "What should we make?" he asked. Noel eyed the materials, then picked up a small, plain cardboard box. "A memory box," she said. He blinked. She hadn't said that phrase in over a year. They decorated it together in silence. She placed stickers of stars on the lid. He drew a small red heart in one corner. They glued a photo of her and her mother on the inside of the lid when he hadn't realized she still carried in her backpack. "This box is for the good things," she said. His throat tightened. "That's a good idea," he whispered. He watched her tuck a tiny drawing inside, a version of the one she'd given him weeks ago. "This is us safe." When they got home, she placed the box on her nightstand. And for the first time in 3 years, she slept without the hallway light on. One Thursday, Eliza paused their session early. "Noel's doing well," she said, "but I'd like to try something new next week." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "I'd like to do a session just with you." He hesitated. "Me?" "She's opening up because she feels you're showing up for her, but part of this process is making sure you have space, too." "I don't need therapy." Eliza didn't push. "Maybe not, but you're here anyway." He didn't say yes. But he didn't say no. And the following week, when Noel went to play in the back with another therapist, Adrian stayed on the couch. It started slowly. Eliza didn't ask questions, not at first, just gave him space to speak if he wanted. Some sessions passed with only a few words, others cracked open parts of him he didn't expect. He talked about Myra, his late wife, and how they used to dance in the kitchen, even when the coffee burned and the toast was cold. He talked about the guilt of surviving, the guilt of not being enough. The nights he stayed at the office because the silence at home echoed too loudly. The time he missed Noel's first school play because of a late merger call. The photo she drew of him that week, all in gray. "It's not that I didn't want to be there," he said one day, hands folded tight. "It's that I didn't think I deserved to be." Eliza was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Sometimes we confuse punishment with penance, but children don't want either, they want your presence." It stayed with him. So did the way Noel had smiled that week when he packed her lunch himself, badly, with squashed strawberries and 2 mismatched sandwich halves. "You made this?" she asked, beaming. "Yeah, don't laugh. I love it." He'd almost cried right there at the kitchen counter. And for the first time, he realized maybe the path forward wasn't about fixing everything. Maybe it was about showing up, letting the cracks be seen, so that something honest could grow in the spaces between. It had been 3 months since Adrian first stepped into Eliza Monroe's office. The lavender-scented room no longer felt like foreign territory. Noel now ran ahead of him toward the door, no longer gripping his hand like a life raft. She spoke more, not just in therapy, but at home, at school, in the grocery store when she pointed out a cereal he'd never noticed. Her voice was soft, still, but steady. And when she smiled, really smiled, it did something to him, like flipping on a light in a room he'd forgotten was there. They had rituals now. Therapy Tuesdays always ended with a walk to the corner bakery. Noel would order the same thing each time, a chocolate croissant, warm, and Adrian would sip burnt coffee from a paper cup, watching her smear chocolate across her cheek. She started telling him about her day, sometimes in full sentences, sometimes in fragments. He learned she liked science more than reading, that she thought her art teacher wore silly shoes, that someone named Ava had invited her to play house on the playground and let her be the mom. The first time she told him that, he'd blinked too fast, too many times. "Did you like being the mom?" he asked. She nodded, chewing. "I made them pancakes and let the dolls sleep in. I think that's what moms do." Adrian didn't answer right away, just reached out and brushed a smudge of chocolate from her chin. "You'd make a good one," he said. In his own sessions, Adrian had begun letting the silence settle in a different way. He didn't rush through it anymore. He let it stretch, fold into him, press against the corners of his grief like hands on glass. Sometimes he didn't cry until hours later, when he was alone in the dark with nothing but the sound of the city outside. One afternoon, Eliza asked a question he didn't see coming. What would Myra think if she saw the two of you now? He hadn't spoken her name in weeks. He stared at the floor, then the ceiling, then at the frayed edge of the throw pillow on the couch. "She'd probably say I waited too long," he said. "And after that, she'd say thank you for finally learning how to listen." To who? To Noel, to myself, to what I've been running from. Eliza nodded, quiet. That's a brave thing, she said. Most people stay in the running, you didn't. He didn't feel brave, but he felt present. And that was a start. Spring settled over the city in slow, careful ways. Parks filled with laughter and pink blossoms. Windows opened again. People lingered outside cafes longer, and children ran in loose, untidy packs after school. Adrian started leaving work earlier, not just on Tuesdays. He didn't always go straight home. Sometimes he sat in the park outside Noel's school with a book, pretending to read, waiting for her tiny backpack to appear among the crowd. One day, she spotted him before he stood. "Dad," she called. Her voice was bright and loud enough that two other parents turned. She ran to him, arms out, and when she hugged him, her whole body leaned in. That night she fell asleep on the couch beside him, a pencil still in her hand, halfway through a list of things she loved. He read it in the dim lamp light. Things I love. Pancakes. Rainy mornings. Dad's bad jokes. The red blanket. My bunny. When people don't rush me. Tuesday croissants. The sound of the dishwasher. Drawing. My mom. My dad. Me. He stared at the last one for a long time. It was the first time she'd ever written that. The next therapy session, Eliza handed Noel a stack of storybooks and asked if she'd like to choose one to read together. Noel selected one with watercolor illustrations and climbed onto the couch without hesitation. As they read, Eliza glanced at Adrian. "You're quieter today." He nodded. "I've been thinking." "About?" He folded his hands. "About what comes after healing." "There's always something," she said. He glanced at Noel, curled against the cushions, fully at ease. "I used to think I was protecting her by keeping everything in order. Perfect routines, clean lines, no surprises. And now? Now I think maybe I was protecting myself, from the mess, from the softness of it all." Eliza closed the book and let the silence stretch again, easy this time. "She's not the only one learning to feel safe," she said. He smiled faintly. "No, she's teaching me too." They left 10 minutes early that day. Noel tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Can we go to the park instead of the bakery?" He nodded. They walked in slow steps through the late afternoon, sun spilling through the trees in pale gold. She swung her legs from the edge of a bench while he listened to her talk about clouds and how one looked like a dragon. "She'd like this day," she said suddenly out of nowhere. Adrian blinked. "Who?" "Mom." He swallowed. "Yeah," he said quietly, "she really would." Noel leaned her head on his arm. "I think she sees us." He didn't know what to say, so he rested his hand over hers and let the breeze say it for him. May brought the kind of warmth that made everything feel closer to possible. The city peeled off its winter layers, and so did Adrian in his own way. He still wore suits, but he'd leave the top button undone now, even forget the tie some days. He didn't check his email between therapy drop-offs and pickups. He missed a few morning meetings on purpose. Noel had started singing in the shower. It was off-key, delightful, and full of made-up lyrics. Adrian would stand outside the bathroom door listening. He never interrupted, just smiled to himself and leaned against the wall, letting her small voice fill the space between them. Some nights he pulled her homework beside his laptop on the kitchen island. She'd draw frogs wearing raincoats while he skimmed through legal memos. He'd point out her misspelled words, and she'd roll her eyes at his serious voice. They had this quiet choreography now, this shared space where her crayons could sit beside his quarterly reports. One evening, as she colored a picture of a tree with bright orange leaves, wrong season, but he didn't correct her, she asked, "Do you ever miss Mommy when I do?" The question knocked the air from his lungs. "Yeah," he said after a beat, "I think that's when I miss her most." Noel nodded like that answer made perfect sense. Then she handed him a crayon. "You can color with me." He hesitated. Then he set down his pen, picked up the green crayon, and filled in the grass. Dr. Eliza Monroe suggested they try a joint session again. This time not with toys or drawings or books, just conversation. "I think she's ready," she said, "and I think you might be too." They sat on the couch side by side, Noel close enough that their knees touched. Eliza asked if Noel wanted to talk about anything she'd been thinking about lately. The little girl sat quietly for a minute, then looked up at Adrian. "Do you remember when we used to eat dinner with Mommy and the plates didn't match?" He smiled. She hated buying full sets. She said every plate should have its own story. "I remember. She told me mine had stars, even though they weren't really stars, just dots." "They were definitely stars," he said. Noel looked at Eliza. "We don't eat at the table anymore, not like that." Eliza nodded. "Would you like to?" Noel looked back at her dad. "I think I would." Adrian placed a hand over hers. "Then let's start." That night they set the table for two. No fancy dinner, just soup from a can and grilled cheese cut into triangles. Adrian searched the kitchen cabinets and found one of the old mismatched plates, blue with a faded rim, the one Myra used to call the Constellation. He set it in front of Noel without a word. She lit up like someone had turned on a string of lights behind her eyes. "You remembered." "Every star." They didn't say much during dinner. They didn't need to. And when Noel yawned halfway through her second triangle, Adrian picked her up and carried her to bed. She was too big to be carried like that anymore, but she didn't protest. Just rested her head on his shoulder and said, "I like our quiet." He did too. A few days later, Adrian received an invitation from Noel's school. Special Persons Day. Parents, grandparents, guardians, anyone the child deemed special enough to show their world to. He almost skipped it. It landed right in the middle of a shareholders' strategy meeting. But when he mentioned it to Noel, her eyes lit up. "I want to show you my desk," she said, "and my favorite window, and where Ava and I eat snack." So he rescheduled the meeting. It felt strange, walking through an elementary school in polished dress shoes. Everything smelled faintly of glue and markers, but Noel took his hand and guided him down the hallway like she owned it. At her desk, she showed him a paper snowflake taped to the side. "I made it after therapy. Eliza said sometimes we can be soft and sharp at the same time." He crouched beside her. "She's smart. So is Ava. She said you look like a movie star when you wear sunglasses." He laughed. "Remind me to thank her." Noel grinned. Then her teacher approached with a camera and asked if they wanted a photo together. Adrian hesitated. He hadn't taken a photo with Noel in over a year. "Is it okay if I put my arm here?" he asked. Noel nodded and leaned in, her head tilted toward his. Click. Afterward she looked up at him. "I want to frame it." He cleared his throat. "Me too." One Thursday evening, during his solo session, Eliza asked him something unexpected. "Have you ever considered that you're healing with her, not just for her?" He frowned. "What's the difference?" "When we heal for someone, we try to protect them from our broken parts. When we heal with someone, we let them see the cracks so they know they're not alone in theirs." He thought about the way Noel looked at him now. Less like she was afraid to need him, more like she trusted that he could hold her needs and his own. "I used to think I had to be a wall," he said. "And now I think I'm learning how to be a door." Eliza smiled. "That's a beautiful thing to be." He stayed an extra 5 minutes that day. No reason, just sat there letting the room hold him. The next Saturday, Noel surprised him with a request. "Can we go somewhere with trees?" He blinked. "Like a park?" "No, like woods, like a place where it smells like dirt and birds and the air isn't loud." He stared at her, then nodded slowly. "I'll find something." They drove out of the city that weekend, just the two of them. He rented a small cabin tucked behind a row of pine trees and let her pack her own bag. She brought the red blanket, her bunny, and a jar of seashells for reasons he didn't understand but didn't question. They hiked a short trail that led to a clearing with a quiet creek. She took off her shoes and stood in the water, laughing at how cold it was. Adrian didn't check his phone once. That night they sat on the porch wrapped in layers, a thermos of hot cocoa between them. Crickets hummed in the trees. The stars came out one by one. "Do you think Mommy can see this?" she asked. He looked up. "I think she wouldn't miss it." "I miss her." "I know." Noel was quiet a while, then said, "I think I miss her and love our life now. Is that okay?" Adrian pulled her close. "It's more than okay, it's honest, it's what she'd want." She nodded against his chest. "I like when we're here," she whispered. "So do I." They stayed outside until the thermos ran dry and the sky turned velvet. It wasn't the life he planned, but it was theirs, and it was beginning to feel whole. Summer arrived quietly, no fanfare, just longer light and open windows and the faint hum of life growing where it had once stalled. Adrian had begun walking Noel to school most mornings, not always, but enough that she started waiting by the door with her sneakers already tied. She'd hand him her backpack, confident he'd carry it, and most days he did. The sidewalks were lined with sidewalk chalk and warm air. It was the kind of routine he used to think he was too busy for. Now he found himself protective of it like a fragile treasure. The therapy sessions began to taper off, not because they weren't needed, but because something in both of them had found rhythm. Eliza called it integration. Adrian called it breathing. Noel didn't cling to his arm in the waiting room anymore. She sat with her knees pulled up in the corner chair, drawing maps to imaginary places. She'd begun inviting him into her world in new ways. She wanted his opinion on paint colors for her bedroom, asked if they could host a sleepover for her two closest friends, even offered to teach him how to braid hair, badly, so one day if I ever need help you won't mess it up too much. She made him laugh more now, and not just polite parental laughter, real from the stomach kind, loud and sudden and healing. He couldn't remember the last time she'd been afraid of her own voice. On their final joint session, Eliza greeted them with the same calm smile she always wore, but her tone carried a kind of quiet ceremony. "I think it's time we celebrate how far you've both come," she said. Noel beamed. "Do we get cake?" "Not today," Eliza laughed, "but I did want to ask you something." She looked at Noel. "If you had to write a letter to the you from 6 months ago, what would you say?" Noel blinked, thoughtful. "Maybe that it's okay to be scared," she said, "but also that people don't stop loving you just because you're quiet." Eliza nodded gently. "And what would you tell your dad?" Noel turned to him. "I'd tell him thank you for not staying behind the door." Adrian's chest ached at her words. He didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice was soft. "I'd tell you thank you too," he said, "for showing me the way out." Eliza smiled. "Then I think we're ready." There were no balloons, no certificates, just a quiet goodbye and a hug that lasted a second longer than most. Outside, the city moved on unbothered, but Adrian knew, so did Noel. Something real had happened in that small, lavender-scented room. Something that would echo. August brought its own rhythm, slow mornings, library visits, messy art projects spread across the living room floor. Adrian started cooking more, though it mostly involved eggs and things from a box. Noel didn't mind. She said he made the best lumpy pancakes in the world. They traveled once more before school started, just a short weekend to a sleepy town on the Hudson. Noel collected smooth stones by the river and declared herself an expert on skipping them. He let her believe it, even though her throws splashed more than skipped. They stayed in a little cottage with uneven floors and soft beds, and one night, as they lay under a shared blanket watching the ceiling fan spin, Noel whispered, "I don't think I'm scared of being alone anymore." Adrian turned to face her. "You're never alone, monkey." "I know, but even when you're not here, I think I still feel safe." She reached for his hand. "I think that's what healing is." He didn't answer right away, just pulled her closer. The fan kept spinning. The fall brought change, as it always did. Noel started second grade. Adrian gave up one of his board seats and scaled back his hours. His assistant almost didn't believe him when he said he wanted to be home by 5 most nights. "You're serious?" she asked. He nodded. Things shifted. And they had, not just in his calendar, but in him. The penthouse still looked the same. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, but now there were smudges on the glass from Noel's fingers, crayon marks on a corner wall, a half-completed puzzle on the dining table. Life spilled in all the right places. One afternoon after school, Noel asked if they could write a story together. "You can do the grown-up words," she said. "I'll do the important parts." He raised an eyebrow. "Aren't those the same?" "No," she giggled. "Grown-ups always forget the magic parts." So they wrote a story about a man made of glass and a girl who taught him how to bend without breaking. They printed it and stapled the pages and made a cover with glitter glue that never quite dried. They left it on the kitchen counter, like a monument. Late one night after she'd gone to sleep, Adrian sat on the balcony with the city stretched before him. The skyline blinked in quiet patterns, and below, the hum of taxis and footsteps formed a kind of lullaby. He thought about Myra, how she used to lean on this same railing with a glass of wine and talk about the future. How she once told him she wanted Noel to grow up brave, not big or impressive or high-achieving, just brave enough to be herself. "She'll be quiet," Myra had said, "but not small." Adrian smiled into the wind. She wasn't small, not anymore. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the noise fade, and pictured her. The way she'd laugh from her belly, the way she looked at their daughter like she was the sun cracking through every storm. "I got her here," he whispered. "I hope that counts." And somewhere deep in his chest, where grief had once lived in shadow, something bloomed. A peace not total but real. On the last day of summer, they went back to the bakery. Same corner table, same croissant. Noel sat across from him with crumbs on her chin, reading a book she hadn't put down all week. "Did you know," she said between bites, "that sunflowers follow the sun?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think I've heard that." "But if there's no sun," she added, licking her fingers. They turned to each other. He looked at her for a long second, then smiled. "I didn't know that." "Well," she said, wiping her mouth, "now you do." She reached across the table and held his hand. And in her small, steady grip, he felt every mile they'd traveled together. From silence, through grief, into light.